What happens when a man with billions in the bank decides to ruin a young woman's life over a single sentence? Alistair Finch, a titan of industry, thought he could crush anyone who defied him. When he got a waitress named Clara fired for simply talking back, he considered it a minor annoyance, already forgotten. He never imagined that his moment of petty cruelty would backfire so spectacularly. He thought he had silenced her, but the very next day in his gleaming boardroom, he wasn't facing a defeated waitress. He was facing her lawyer, a legal predator who was about to teach a billionaire the true meaning of power. Ethelgard's was not merely a restaurant. It was a sanctuary for the city's elite. The air inside was thick with the scent of old money, expensive perfume, and the subtle aroma of truffle oil. Sunlight dared not enter directly, filtered through stained glass windows that cast muted, jewel-toned patterns across the damask tablecloths. The clinking of Christoffel silverware against bone china was the room's primary music, a gentle percussion beneath the hushed whispers of stock options and offshore accounts. In this gilded cage, Clara Rossi moved with a practiced grace that belied her exhaustion. At 24, she wore her waitress uniform like a suit of armor. Each polished button and crisp seam was a defense against the world that had forced her to put her dreams on hold. Law school acceptance letters were tucked away in a box under her bed, gathering dust while she gathered tips to pay for her mother's mounting medical bills. Her mother, Elena, was a fighter, but the illness was a relentless siege, and every shift Clara worked was another sandbag on the barricade. Clara was good at her job. More than good, she was exceptional. She could read a table in seconds, could identify the nervous junior executive trying to impress a client, the old money couple celebrating a silent anniversary, the insecure socialite desperate for validation. She possessed an emotional intelligence that allowed her to be attentive without being intrusive. A ghost who appeared precisely when needed and vanished just as quickly. Her manager, a perpetually anxious man named Mr. Davies, considered her his most reliable employee, the one he assigned to his most important and often most difficult patrons. That evening, the heavy oak doors of Ethelgard's swung open, and a chill seemed to follow the man who entered. Alistair Finch did not walk into a room. He conquered it. He was a man in his late 50s with a mane of silver hair swept back from a face that seemed carved from granite. His suit was a custom-tailored masterpiece of dark wool, his watch a Patek Philippe that whispered its value rather than shouting it. He was followed by two younger men in similarly expensive suits, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. They were his sycophants, his court jesters, there to laugh at his jokes and marvel at his power. The corner table. Now, Finch commanded the maitre d', not asking but stating a fact of the universe. The table was reserved, of course, but for a man like Finch, reservations were for other people. The maitre d' sputtered for a moment before scurrying to appease him. Mr. Davies saw the arrival, and his face paled. "Clara," he hissed, rushing over to her station. "Table 7. It's Alistair Finch. Whatever he wants, he gets. No mistakes. Do you understand?" "None." Clara nodded, her expression serene, though a knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach. She had served Finch before. He was a creature of casual cruelty, a man who seemed to derive a strange pleasure from reminding service staff of their station in life. He would find fault where there was none, complain about the temperature of a wine that was perfect, and speak to the staff as if they were inanimate objects. She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and approached the table. "Good evening, Mr. Finch. Welcome back to Ethelgard's. May I get you started with something to drink?" Finch didn't even look at her. He was busy pontificating to his companions about a recent corporate acquisition. Tore their board apart. They didn't know what hit them. Amateurs. He waved a dismissive hand in her general direction. "The 59 Chateau Margaux. And don't let the sommelier waste my time. Just bring it." Clara knew the wine. It was one of the most expensive and delicate vintages in their cellar, a bottle that cost more than her monthly rent. It required careful decanting and a gentle hand. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice even. The evening had begun. The pieces were on the board, and as Clara turned to retrieve the priceless bottle of wine, she had no idea that this shift would not end with a tip, but with a declaration of war. The meal unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. Alistair Finch was in a particularly foul mood, and he seemed determined to make it everyone's problem. The Chateau Margaux, decanted with surgical precision by Clara, was acceptable, barely. The seared scallops were a trifle rubbery. The prime fillet, cooked to a perfect medium rare, was lacking character. With each complaint, his voice grew louder, his gestures more theatrical, designed to command the attention of the surrounding tables. Clara absorbed each thinly veiled insult with unwavering professionalism. She apologized, offered replacements, and maintained a calm, neutral expression that was a testament to her self-control. Her co-workers watched from a distance with a mixture of pity and admiration. They knew the drill. Survive the Finch storm and hope he didn't get you in his sights. The two younger men at his table, whose names Clara learned were Mark and Alex, did their best to placate their boss. They laughed too loudly at his unfunny jokes and agreed with every ridiculous culinary critique. They were sharks in training, learning at the feet of the master. The breaking point came during dessert. Finch had ordered the Grand Marnier soufflé, a notoriously difficult dish that the restaurant's pastry chef was famous for perfecting. It arrived at the table, tall, golden brown, and impossibly light. Finch stared at it for a long moment before picking up his spoon and plunging it into the center, deflating it with a sigh of disappointment. "Pathetic," he announced to the room at large. "This is what passes for haute cuisine? My housekeeper could do better." One of the young men, Alex, chimed in nervously. "It does seem a little airy, sir." Finch turned his glare on him. "Airy? It's hollow, empty, just like the people who work in this place." His eyes, cold and gray as a winter sea, finally landed on Clara, who was standing a few feet away, waiting to clear the plates. "You," he said, pointing his spoon at her, "you've been hovering all night. What's your story? Did you dream of carrying plates for a living when you were a little girl?" The question was designed to humiliate, to strip her of her dignity in front of his audience. The other diners were now openly staring, their own conversations forgotten. This was the real dinner theater. Clara felt a flush of heat rise up her neck, but her voice remained steady. "I enjoy my work, sir. It allows me to meet interesting people." Finch let out a short, barking laugh. "Interesting people? You mean people like me, who pay your salary? People who could buy and sell this entire pathetic establishment without noticing the dip in their accounts?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "Let me give you some advice. People in your position should be invisible. You should do your job, take your pittance of a tip, and be grateful you have a job at all. You are here to serve, not to be interesting." He was no longer just a rude customer. He was attacking her worth, her very existence. He was trying to make her feel small, worthless, like a bug he could squash under his heel. Something inside Clara, a long dormant coil of defiance and self-respect, finally snapped. All the sleepless nights worrying about her mother, all the sacrifices she had made for a future that felt increasingly distant, it all coalesced into a single moment of clarity. She took a small step forward, her chin held high. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words were quiet, precise, and sharper than any knife in the kitchen. "Sir," she began, her voice cutting through the silence, "with all due respect, my position does not define my worth, just as your wealth does not define your character. I serve your food, but I am not your servant." The room went completely still. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. The two younger men looked as if they had just witnessed a puppy challenge a wolf. Finch's face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, slowly began to contort. A dark mottled red crept up from his collar. His eyes narrowed into slits of pure fury. No one had spoken to Alistair Finch like that in decades. He had built an empire on the foundation of other people's fear and deference. This waitress, this nobody, had just dared to talk back. She had drawn a line in the sand, and he was a man who did not tolerate lines. "What?" he hissed, the word a puff of cold air. "Did you just say to me?" The silence in Ethelgard's was absolute. Alistair Finch's question hung in the air, thick and menacing. He was no longer just angry. He was offended on an existential level. The natural order of his universe, An order where he was the sun and everyone else were minor planets orbiting him had been challenged. Clara met his gaze without flinching. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline and fear, but her expression remained composed. She had said what she needed to say. There was no taking it back, and a part of her didn't want to. "I said," she repeated calmly, "that I am not your servant." Finch's face was now a thunderous mask. He slowly pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the polished floor. He stood up, his considerable height casting a shadow over the table. He didn't look at Clara. Instead, he scanned the room until his eyes locked on the terrified face of Mr. Davies, who was already scurrying towards them, his hands fluttering nervously. "Davies!" Finch's voice boomed, startling several diners. "Get over here!" Mr. Davies practically ran the last few feet, his face slick with sweat. "Mr. Finch, sir, is there a problem? I am so terribly sorry for any—" Finch cut him off with a vicious chop of his hand. "A problem? You have an insolent, insubordinate employee who seems to believe this is a debate club." He pointed a trembling finger at Clara, his hands shaking with rage. "I come here, I spend thousands of dollars, and I have to endure lectures on character from a waitress? From her? Mr. Finch, I assure you, she will be disciplined." "Severely," Davies stammered, bowing his head slightly as if expecting a blow. "Clara, apologize to Mr. Finch at once." Clara remained silent, her jaw set. An apology would be a lie. It would mean validating his cruelty, admitting that he had the right to treat another human being as less than. She would not do it. Her silence was her answer, and it infuriated Finch even more. "You see, no remorse," he roared. He turned his full, wrathful attention to Davies. "I want her fired, not tomorrow, not at the end of her shift. I want her fired right now. I want to see her walk out that door before I pay my bill. If she is still in this building in 5 minutes, I will not only never return, I will make it my personal mission to destroy this restaurant's reputation. I will call every food critic, every investor, every single person of influence I know, and I will tell them that Ethelgard's condones this kind of disgusting behavior from its staff. Your establishment will be a ghost town by next month. Do you understand me?" It was a nuclear threat, and Mr. Davies was not a man equipped for that kind of warfare. He was a man of profit margins and staff schedules, not corporate espionage. The threat of Alistair Finch's wrath was enough to make him fold completely. He turned to Clara, his eyes pleading, but his voice firm with the borrowed authority of fear. "Clara, you're fired. Please collect your things and leave immediately." The words hit her like a physical blow. Fired, just like that. The job that paid for her mother's medication, the only thing keeping them afloat. Gone in an instant because she had refused to be humiliated. A wave of nausea and panic washed over her. She could feel the eyes of every diner, every staff member on her. Some were pitiful, some were scornful, some were simply glad it wasn't them. She looked at Finch, who was now smiling. It was a small, tight, triumphant smile of a predator who has just made a kill. He had won. He had proven his power. Without another word, Clara turned and walked away from the table. She moved with a strange, dreamlike slowness, her body feeling both heavy and disconnected. She went to the small staff locker room in the back, her colleagues avoiding her gaze, busying themselves with polishing glasses or folding napkins. They couldn't afford to be associated with her. She understood. She took off the crisp apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the bench. She gathered her purse and her worn copy of a constitutional law textbook she'd been reading on her breaks. As she walked through the kitchen, the chef, a burly man named Antoine who rarely spoke, met her eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of respect. It was a small comfort, but it was something. As she pushed open the back alley door and stepped into the cold night air, the sounds of the restaurant, the clinking glasses, the soft music, faded behind her. She was alone with the stench of garbage and the crushing weight of what had just happened. The billionaire had gotten his way. She had lost everything. Leaning against the cold brick wall, Clara Rossi finally allowed the tears to fall. The walk home was a blur. Clara's mind raced, a chaotic whirlwind of panic and despair. How would she tell her mother? How would she afford the next round of prescriptions? The law school letters under her bed felt like relics from another person's life, a life of hope and possibility that had just been extinguished. Her apartment, usually a small haven of warmth and comfort, felt like a cage. She sat on her second-hand sofa for what felt like hours, the silence pressing in on her. The textbook in her bag felt like a cruel joke. What was the point of studying the law when the world was so clearly ruled by men who were above it? Men like Alistair Finch, who could destroy a life as casually as he ordered a bottle of wine. Bitterness and rage began to burn through the fog of her despair. He had fired her not because she was a bad employee, but because she had refused to let him break her spirit. He had made an example of her. A deep, primal sense of injustice took root in her heart. He shouldn't be allowed to get away with it. People like him shouldn't be allowed to trample over others without consequence. Then an idea began to form. It was a long shot, a desperate hope, but it was better than nothing. She thought of a promise made long ago at her father's funeral. Her father, a brilliant but humble public defender, had passed away 2 years prior. His best friend from law school, a man who had become like an uncle to her, had stood by her side at the graveside. "Clara," he had said, his voice thick with grief but firm with resolve, "your father was the best man I ever knew. He fought for the little guy his whole life. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything at all, you call me. Day or night, I owe him that much." She hadn't spoken to him in months, not wanting to be a bother. He moved in circles she couldn't even imagine. While her father had chosen public service, his best friend had gone into corporate law and become a legend. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. The name was there, a stark reminder of a different world. Benjamin Carter. Benjamin Carter wasn't just a lawyer. He was the lawyer. He was the head of Carter, Thorne and Associates, one of the most powerful and feared law firms in the country. He was known as the Shark, a brilliant legal mind who never lost a case he believed in. He represented corporations and billionaires, but his reputation was built on his unshakable ethics and his ferocious defense of his clients. Clara hesitated. What could she possibly say? "Hi, Uncle Ben. Remember me? I got fired from my waitressing job for talking back to a rich guy." It sounded so trivial, so pathetic. He dealt with billion-dollar mergers and hostile takeovers. Why would he care about her small, insignificant problem? But then she remembered Finch's smug, triumphant smile. She remembered the humiliation, the injustice. Her father would have told her to fight. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she pressed the call button. It rang twice, and then a deep, familiar voice answered, sharp and professional. "Benjamin Carter." "Uncle Ben?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. It's Clara. Clara Rossi." There was a pause, and then the tone of the voice on the other end shifted instantly, all the corporate steel melting away to be replaced by genuine warmth and concern. "Clara, my goodness, it's so good to hear your voice. Is everything all right? Is it your mother?" "Mom's the same," she said, tears welling in her eyes again. It's me. Something happened tonight. I lost my job." "Tell me everything," Benjamin said, his voice now laced with a new, harder edge. "Don't leave out a single detail." And so she did. She recounted the entire evening, from the moment Alistair Finch walked in, to his insults, to her quiet defiance, and finally to the brutal public firing. She expected sympathy, perhaps an offer of some money to help her get by. What she got was a cold, controlled fury. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, she worried he thought she was being foolish. "Benjamin?" she asked tentatively. "Alistair Finch," he said, and the way he spoke the name sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a predator identifying its prey. "Clara, I know him. Our firm has dealt with his corporation's legal team before. He's a bully with a glass jaw. He surrounds himself with yes men and believes his own press." He paused again, and Clara could practically hear the gears turning in his brilliant mind. "He didn't just fire you, Clara. He did it publicly. He made a scene with the intent to cause you emotional distress and damage your reputation. He used his economic power to coerce your employer into an illegal act of retaliation. This isn't just a rude customer. This is a tortious act. The legal terms coming from him didn't sound like something from her textbook. They sounded like weapons. "Clara," Benjamin Carter said, his voice now devoid of all warmth, replaced by the chilling precision of the shark. "Don't you worry about your mother's bills. Don't worry about anything. Mr. Finch wanted to make an example of you. Well, I think it's time someone made an example of him. Be at my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Wear something professional." The next morning, Clara stood before the gleaming glass and steel skyscraper that housed Carter, Thorne and Associates. It was a monument to power, so tall it seemed to scrape the clouds. People in impeccable suits flowed in and out of the revolving doors, their faces set with purpose. It was a world away from the service alley of Ethelgard's. Dressed in her only professional outfit, a simple black blazer and skirt she'd bought for a law school interview, Clara felt impossibly small, but Benjamin's words echoed in her mind, giving her a sliver of courage. She took a breath and walked inside. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and mahogany. The receptionist, seated behind a desk that looked like a modern art installation, directed her to the 50th floor. The elevator ride was silent and swift, her ears popping as she ascended. Benjamin Carter's office was larger than her entire apartment. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. Bookshelves lined the other walls, filled not with law books but with literature, history, and philosophy. Benjamin was waiting for her, standing by the window. He was exactly as she remembered, tall and impeccably dressed, with kind eyes that held a glint of steel. He greeted her with a warm hug. "Clara, I am so sorry you had to go through that, but I am immensely proud of you. Your father would have been too. You stood up for yourself. Now it's my turn to stand up for you." He gestured for her to sit in one of the plush leather chairs opposite his massive desk. Two other people were already in the room, a sharp-looking woman in her 30s and a young man who looked like he had just graduated from Harvard. "Clara, this is Amelia Vance, our head of litigation, and this is David Chen, one of our brightest associates," Benjamin said. "They'll be working with us. I've already briefed them." Amelia Vance shook Clara's hand, her grip firm. "Ms. Rossi, what Mr. Finch did was not just unethical, it was actionable. We're looking at wrongful termination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and possibly slander and tortious interference with a business relationship." David Chen was already scribbling notes on a legal pad. "We'll need a list of all employees who were on shift last night," he said, "especially the manager, Mr. Davies. We'll also subpoena the restaurant's security footage. His tirade will be on camera." Clara watched, stunned, as they began to work. It was like watching a team of master strategists plan a battle. They spoke a language of motions, depositions, and discovery. Within minutes, a plan was formed. "We won't start with a lawsuit," Benjamin declared, leaning back in his chair. "That's too slow. Finch is an arrogant man. He thinks this is over. We're going to hit him fast and hard right where he lives." He looked at David. "Draft a letter, not a friendly one. A demand letter. We'll outline our case in brutal detail. We'll cite the relevant statutes he violated. We'll demand a public apology to Ms. Rossi, full restitution for lost wages, punitive damages for emotional distress, and a significant donation to a charity that supports service industry workers. We'll give him 24 hours to respond." Amelia smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "He'll ignore it. He'll give it to his in-house counsel, and they'll laugh it off." "Exactly," Benjamin agreed. "And that's when we strike. David, once the letter is sent, you will also prepare the full complaint to be filed in court. We'll have it ready to go the moment his deadline expires. Amelia, I want you to start digging into Finch's past. Any other instances of this kind of behavior? Lawsuits, settlements, complaints? He's a bully. Bullies leave a trail." The energy in the room was electric. Clara, who just yesterday had been weeping in an alleyway, was now at the center of a legal hurricane being marshaled on her behalf. It was terrifying and exhilarating. "Benjamin," she said quietly, "are you sure about this? He's so powerful." Benjamin swiveled his chair to face her, his expression softening. "Clara, there are two types of power in this world. There's the power that comes from money, which is loud, arrogant, and fragile. Then there's the power that comes from the law. It's quiet, it's methodical, and when wielded correctly, it is absolute. Alistair Finch has forgotten that. We are simply going to remind him. He picked up his phone. Get me a process server. I have a letter that needs to be hand-delivered to Alistair Finch at Finch Holdings. Today. The war machine was awake, and it was hungry. Alistair Finch was on top of the world. He sat at the head of a 20-foot-long obsidian table in the main boardroom of Finch Holdings. The room was his throne room, located on the top floor of his skyscraper, offering a view that made the rest of the city look like a child's playset. He was in the middle of closing a hostile takeover of a rival tech firm, a deal worth hundreds of millions. His legal team was present, along with the shell-shocked board members of the company he was devouring. He was enjoying himself immensely. The humiliation of the waitress the night before had been a pleasant appetizer. This deal was the main course. The offer is final, he said, steepling his fingers. You can accept it, or I can bleed your company dry on the open market. Your choice. It was at that precise moment of triumph that his assistant, a nervous young woman named Sarah, entered the room, breaking the unwritten rule that he was never to be disturbed during a closing. Mr. Finch, she whispered, her face pale. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's a man here, a process server. He insists on delivering this to you personally. Finch's good mood evaporated. A process server? For what? Some nuisance lawsuit? Get rid of him. Give it to legal. He said it had to be you, sir, Sarah stammered. He's very insistent. Finch let out an exasperated sigh, a show of annoyance for his audience. Fine, bring him in. Let's see what pathetic little gnat has decided to buzz around my head. The process server was an unimpressive man in a worn suit, but he carried himself with an air of official purpose. He walked directly to the head of the table, placed a thick envelope in front of Alistair Finch, and said, You have been served. He then turned and walked out without another word. A few of the board members from the other company exchanged uneasy glances. Finch, however, scoffed. He picked up the envelope and tore it open with a flourish, expecting to see a frivolous claim he could have his lawyers quash in an hour. He pulled out the letter. The letterhead at the top made him pause for a fraction of a second. Carter, Thorne and Associates. He knew the name. Everyone in his world knew the name. They were the apex predators. He felt a flicker of annoyance. Who had he angered that would hire them? He began to read. His smug expression slowly dissolved as his eyes moved down the page. The words Clara Rossi jumped out at him. The waitress. He almost laughed. She had hired a lawyer? A waitress? But as he kept reading, the amusement curdled into disbelief and then into a cold knot of dread in his stomach. The letter was not a plea. It was a declaration. It laid out his actions from the previous night in meticulous, damning detail. It quoted his exact words. It listed the specific laws he had broken: wrongful termination, defamation, public humiliation. It was signed by Benjamin Carter himself. His chief legal counsel, a man named Henderson, noticed the change in his boss's demeanor. Sir, is everything all right? Finch didn't answer. He just slid the letter across the obsidian table. Henderson picked it up and began to read. His face went from curious to concerned to utterly horrified. He looked up at Finch, his eyes wide. Alistair, this is from Benjamin Carter, he whispered, as if saying the name too loudly might summon the man. He's not a patent troll or a slip-and-fall artist. He's the shark. He doesn't bluff. Finch finally found his voice, though it was raspy. It's absurd. Over a waitress? He's grandstanding. We'll crush them. File a countersuit for harassment. Henderson shook his head, looking at the letter again. I don't think you understand. They're citing witness statements and security footage. They're demanding a public apology and punitive damages that are substantial. And they've given us a 24-hour deadline to respond. Alistair, this isn't a problem. This is a crisis. The room, once charged with Finch's power, was now thick with a new, uncomfortable tension. The board members of the company he was acquiring were watching him, their expressions shifting from fear to curiosity. For the first time, they saw a crack in the Titan's armor. Alistair Finch looked at the letter again. It felt like a paper cut, a small, insignificant wound. But he had a terrifying feeling that this particular cut was laced with a potent, fast-acting poison that threatened to bring his entire empire crashing down around him. The 24-hour deadline passed in contemptuous silence from Finch's end. As Benjamin Carter had predicted, Alistair's arrogance wouldn't allow him to capitulate to a demand from a nobody. He instructed Henderson to send a dismissive, one-sentence response brushing off the claims as frivolous and without merit. The moment that email was received at Carter, Thorne and Associates, Benjamin gave a single nod. "File it," he said to David Chen. Within the hour, the lawsuit was officially filed, and Alistair Finch was formally summoned. The initial meeting was set for a week later, not in a courtroom, but in the neutral territory of a mediation firm's conference room. Finch arrived with a phalanx of 3 lawyers, led by Henderson. He was dressed to intimidate, projecting an aura of boredom and annoyance, as if the entire proceeding was a waste of his valuable time. He expected to walk in, have his lawyers threaten and posture, and force a quick, cheap settlement to make the problem go away. When he walked into the conference room, the first thing he saw was Clara. She was not the woman he remembered. Gone was the waitress uniform and the weary, guarded expression. She sat beside Benjamin Carter, dressed in the same simple, professional black suit she had worn to their first meeting. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her face was calm and composed. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a plaintiff. And then there was Benjamin Carter. He rose as Finch entered, not out of deference, but as a predator rises to greet its rival. He was smiling, a polite, razor-thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Alistair," Benjamin said, his voice smooth as silk. "It's been too long. Please have a seat." The casual use of his first name irked Finch immediately. He sat down, his lawyers arranging themselves beside him like pilot fish. Henderson cleared his throat and began. "Mr. Carter, we are here today to state for the record that my client, Mr. Finch, categorically denies all allegations. While he regrets any misunderstanding at the restaurant, your client's termination was a matter between her and her employer. Mr. Finch was merely a patron expressing dissatisfaction." Benjamin listened patiently until Henderson was finished. Then he leaned forward, placing a slim folder on the table. "A misunderstanding?" Benjamin repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Let's be clear about what happened. Your client used his wealth and influence to threaten the livelihood of a business, coercing them into illegally firing my client as retaliation for her refusing to endure his public abuse." He opened the folder. "This is a sworn affidavit from another waitress at Ethelgard's who corroborates everything my client has said. She describes your client's behavior as vicious and designed to humiliate." He slid a second paper across the table. "This is a statement from the maitre d', who confirms he was instructed to give your client a reserved table under duress, a pattern of intimidation." He then tapped a small USB drive. "And this, of course, is the security footage from the restaurant. There is no audio, but the visuals are quite compelling. We can see you, Alistair, jabbing your finger, roaring at Mr. Davies, and then smiling in satisfaction as my client is forced to leave. A jury will love that." Finch's face remained a stony mask, but Henderson was beginning to look pale. "Furthermore," Benjamin continued, his voice gaining momentum, "my associate's research has been most illuminating. We've uncovered 3 prior incidents in the last 5 years where you were involved in public disputes that resulted in service staff being fired. 2 of those were settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. We will be petitioning the court to unseal those records, arguing they are relevant to establishing a pattern of malicious behavior." Finch finally spoke, his voice a low growl. "This is extortion." "No," Benjamin corrected him sharply. "This is accountability, something you have clearly not experienced in a very long time." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. "But we are not here today to talk about money, Alistair. Not yet. We are here to talk about my client." He turned to Clara, his expression softening. "Clara, is there anything you would like to say to Mr. Finch?" Clara took a slow breath, her gaze locking with Finch's. For the first time, he saw not a waitress, but the intelligent, resolute woman she was. "You tried to make me feel worthless," she said, her voice clear and strong. You thought that because I served you food, I was less than you. You tried to erase my dignity because yours is so fragile it can't withstand a single sentence of dissent. You didn't just get me fired, Mr. Finch. You tried to break me, but you failed. The power dynamic in the room had completely inverted. Alistair Finch, the Titan, the master of the universe, was being lectured by the woman he had dismissed as a nobody. His lawyers were silent, shuffling papers, unable to object. Benjamin Carter had systematically dismantled their entire position before they had even made their opening argument. Finch looked from Clara's unyielding face to Benjamin's cold, calculating eyes. He was no longer in his boardroom. He was not in control. He had walked into a trap, and the jaws were now snapping shut. For the first time in his adult life, Alistair Finch was genuinely afraid. The change in Alistair Finch was palpable. The bluster and arrogance had been stripped away, layer by layer, by Benjamin Carter's methodical assault. What remained was a cornered, angry man, his face a grim mask of disbelief. He looked at his own legal team, a silent plea for them to do something, but they could offer nothing but grim, shaken heads. Henderson was already scribbling numbers on a notepad, his mind shifting from defense to damage control. Benjamin Carter leaned back, allowing the silence to stretch, to become its own form of pressure. He had laid his cards on the table, and he knew he held the winning hand. "So," Benjamin said, breaking the quiet, "we can proceed. We will file for discovery. We will depose you, Alistair. You will sit in a room under oath for as long as I deem necessary, and you will answer my questions. We will depose your staff, your business partners. We will depose the staff from the other restaurants. We will turn your life inside out. Or we can discuss a settlement here and now. The choice is yours." Finch's jaw tightened. The thought of a deposition, of being publicly dissected by a lawyer like Carter, was horrifying. It would leak to the press. It would affect his stock prices, his reputation. His entire life was a carefully constructed image of infallible power, and Benjamin was threatening to tear it down to the studs. "What do you want?" Finch finally gritted out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He wasn't speaking to Benjamin. He was looking at Clara. Before Clara could speak, Benjamin held up a hand. "Let me be perfectly clear about the terms. They are not negotiable." He slid a final sheet of paper across the table. It was a list. "First," he began, "you will issue a full, public, and unreserved apology to Ms. Rossi. It will be printed in the city's major newspaper, and it will acknowledge your behavior was abusive and unacceptable. You will state that she was fired as a direct result of your actions." Finch's face flushed with a fresh wave of fury. A public apology was an admission of weakness, an unthinkable humiliation. "Second," Benjamin continued, ignoring him, "you will pay for the full 4-year tuition at the law school of Ms. Rossi's choice. We will consider this part of the punitive damages for disrupting her life and derailing her career plans." Clara's eyes widened. She looked at Benjamin, who gave her a subtle, reassuring glance. "Third, you will pay Ms. Rossi a sum for emotional distress and lost wages. My associate is calculating the final figure, but I assure you it will be significant enough to get your attention." He paused. "We're thinking 7 figures." Henderson let out an audible gasp. "And finally," Benjamin said, his voice dropping to a deadly serious tone, "you will establish a charitable fund with a $2 million endowment. The fund will be administered by an independent board, and its purpose will be to provide legal aid and emergency financial assistance to service industry workers who have been victims of workplace abuse. We can call it the Rossi Fund for Worker Dignity." It was a masterstroke. It wasn't just about money for Clara. It was about systemic change. It was about turning Finch's act of cruelty into a force for good, a legacy of justice that would help countless others. It was karmic retribution, delivered on legal letterhead. Finch was speechless. He was being dismantled, not just financially, but morally. He was being forced to fund the very principle he had violated. He looked at the list, at the cold, hard demands that would cost him millions, but more than that, would cost him his pride. He looked at his lawyers who could offer no escape. He looked at Benjamin Carter, the architect of his demise. And finally, he looked at Clara. He had tried to make her invisible, and she had become the most powerful person in the room. He had tried to take her future, and now he was being forced to build it for her. With a shuddering breath that sounded suspiciously like a sob of rage, Alistair Finch gave a single, jerky nod. "Agreed," he rasped. The war was over. The Waitress had won. 6 months later, the city was painted in the vibrant colors of autumn. The crisp air carried the scent of change, a feeling that resonated deep within Clara Rossi's soul. She was no longer walking home in the dead of night, her feet aching from a long shift. Instead, she was walking across the sprawling, ivy-covered campus of the university's prestigious law school, a heavy satchel of books slung over her shoulder. The weight was a comfort, a tangible symbol of her new life. The apology had appeared 2 weeks after the settlement. It was a full quarter-page ad in the Sunday edition of the city's most respected newspaper, a space usually reserved for luxury brands or corporate announcements. The headline was simple: an unreserved apology to Ms. Clara Rossi. In stark, black and white text, Alistair Finch admitted his behavior had been inexcusable, and that his actions had led directly to her unjust dismissal. It was a public self-flagellation, and it sent shockwaves through the city's elite. For a man whose entire identity was built on an image of unassailable strength, the printed apology was a more profound defeat than any financial penalty. Finch Holdings stock dipped 5% that week, a multi-million-dollar consequence for a moment of cruelty. Clara kept a clipping of it, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what she had survived, and a reminder that the law, when wielded for justice, could indeed humble the powerful. The Rossi Fund for Worker Dignity was launched a month later. Benjamin Carter's firm handled the setup pro bono, and the first person it helped was a hotel housekeeper who had been fired for reporting a wealthy guest's inappropriate behavior. The fund covered her rent and legal fees, allowing her to fight back. Clara had spoken to the woman on the phone, and hearing the gratitude and relief in her voice was more satisfying than any monetary settlement. The echo of her own stand was already creating ripples of change. As for Ethelgard's, the scandal had tarnished its pristine reputation. Facing pressure from investors and patrons who were disgusted by the news, the restaurant's ownership group issued its own apology. Mr. Davies, the manager who had so quickly buckled under Finch's threats, was quietly and permanently encouraged to pursue other opportunities. Clara found a seat on a bench overlooking the campus quad, pulling out her textbook on contract law. She was excelling in her studies, her real-world experience giving her a perspective that her younger classmates lacked. She understood in a way they could not that the abstract principles in these books had the power to be weapons or shields in the lives of real people. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Benjamin. "Your father's favorite coffee shop, 3 p.m., my treat." She met him there, the familiar aroma of roasted coffee beans wrapping around them like a warm hug. Benjamin looked at her, a genuine proud smile on his face. "You look different," he said. "It's not just the clothes. There's a light in your eyes that I haven't seen since you were a little girl." "It's hope," Clara replied, taking a sip of her latte. "You gave me that back, Ben." "No, Clara," he corrected her gently. "I just opened the door. You were the one brave enough to walk through it. Everything you have now, you earned it that night in the restaurant when you chose dignity over silence." They sat for a while, talking about her classes, his cases, and the father and friend they both missed dearly. As she was about to leave, Benjamin stopped her. "You know," he said, his expression thoughtful, "when you graduate, there will be a corner office with your name on it waiting for you at my firm." Clara smiled, a new confidence radiating from her. "Thank you, Ben. That means the world to me. But I think my father would want me to spend some time in the trenches first. There are a lot of Alistair Finches in the world, and not everyone has a Benjamin Carter to call." He simply nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears of pride. He saw it then, so clearly, the legacy of his best friend, the public defender, reborn in the heart of his daughter. The fight was just beginning. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios, but in courage and integrity. Alistair Finch learned the hard way that when you try to crush someone's spirit, you might just awaken a power you never knew existed. Clara not only reclaimed her future, but created a legacy of hope for others in her position. Her journey from waitress to law student shows that no matter your circumstances, your voice has value. And standing up for yourself can change the world, even if it's just one person at a time. Justice may be slow, but for those who are patient and brave, it always arrives. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening.